What if death is not the end of life, but the end of illusion? Human beings have always viewed death as the ultimate termination, a final boundary that separates existence from nothingness. Yet for the great Andalusian philosopher Ibn Arabi, death represents something very different. It is not an ending, but a transformation. It is the dissolution of limitation, the moment when awareness shifts from one mode of perception to another. In the modern world, death is primarily defined biologically. The cessation of neural activity, the halting of metabolic processes. But this definition addresses only what is observable, not what is experienced. From Ibn Arabi's point of view, death is ontological, not merely biological. It marks the transition of consciousness from one dimension of being to another. So the essential question becomes, if consciousness is not simply a byproduct of the brain, could death reveal something deeper about what we truly are? In modern psychological terms, death represents the ultimate loss of control, meaning, and identity. Contemporary culture avoids facing mortality, replacing reflection with constant distraction and consumerism. We build elaborate systems of comfort, technology, and entertainment to shield ourselves from the anxiety of impermanence. This avoidance has been studied extensively under terror management theory. According to this framework, humans create belief systems, religious, national, or personal, to protect themselves from the fear of non-existence. But when these systems weaken, existential anxiety rises. The result is emotional instability, over-identification with ego, and disconnection from authentic meaning. From a neuroscientific perspective, this anxiety is not only philosophical but physiological. The default mode network, a group of brain regions active when we engage in self-referential thinking, is strongly associated with rumination and fear of annihilation. When overactive, this network produces what psychologists call ego fixation, the inability to perceive reality outside one's narrative identity. Studies link excessive DMN activity to anxiety and depression. In essence, humanity interprets death through the lens of the ego, the structure that insists on its own continuity. But if consciousness extends beyond the ego's narrative, the meaning of death may need to be completely redefined. Ibn Arabi, born in 1165 in Andalusia, is often called Al-Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest master. His work represents one of the most systematic attempts to describe consciousness and existence as a single, unified reality. Though widely regarded as a mystic, his writings are profoundly rational. A metaphysical science of awareness. At the core of his philosophy lies al-Wujd, the concept of being as a continuous, indivisible field. For Ibn Arabi, everything that exists is a manifestation of one reality. Death, therefore, cannot be a disappearance. It is merely a transition in the way that reality knows itself through different forms. Modern cognitive science now echoes aspects of this view. The self, once thought to be a stable entity, is increasingly understood as a process, a dynamic construction of memory, attention, and perception. Near-death research and consciousness studies are beginning to explore awareness as potentially not confined to the physical brain. Ibn Arabi's framework provides an intellectual bridge between metaphysics and modern inquiry. His view neither denies science nor relies on dogma. It proposes that death, rather than ending consciousness, reveals the underlying field that makes consciousness possible. For Ibn Arabi, death does not destroy consciousness. It removes limitation. Life and death are two expressions of the same being, oscillating between form and formlessness. The human self, or nafs, operates through several veils: the body, emotions, and thoughts. These layers create the sense of individuality, the I that perceives itself as separate. Physical death simply dissolves the outermost veil, allowing awareness to experience itself more directly, without the filters of form and cognition. A useful analogy comes from information technology. When a computer shuts down, its interface disappears, but the data remains stored on the server. Similarly, death discontinues the interface, the body and personal identity, while the field of awareness persists. Science provides parallel insights. In quantum field theory, energy cannot be destroyed. It merely transforms. Likewise, in neuroscience, consciousness undergoes modulation, as in sleep, anesthesia, or altered states, yet it consistently These observations challenge the assumption that consciousness is wholly dependent on continuous physical activity. The fear of death, therefore, originates from identification with the temporary interface, the body-mind system, rather than with the underlying awareness that sustains it. A central concept in Ibn Arabi's thought is Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being. It asserts that existence is not composed of separate entities, but as a single continuum appearing as multiplicity. Death merely shifts the point of observation within this unified field. He compares the human being to a wave on the surface of the ocean. The wave seems distinct, yet it is never apart from the water. When the form of the wave subsides, the ocean remains. Modern parallels reinforce this view. Systems theory and certain interpretations of panpsychism suggest that consciousness may be a fundamental property of reality, not an emergent phenomenon. Likewise, the predictive processing model in neuroscience indicates that perception is constructed. The brain continuously generates models of reality rather than accessing it directly. This means that what we perceive as separation is the result of cognitive filtering. Death, then, represents the removal of that perceptual boundary. Not annihilation, but the release of limitation, the end. In Ibn Arabi's framework, is the end of confinement within a narrow perceptual system, not the end of existence itself. One of Ibn Arabi's most practical teachings is the call to die before you die. This phrase refers not to physical death, but to the dissolution of egoic identification, the psychological structure that fears. Impermanence. Die before dying means to recognize that the personal self is not the ultimate subject of experience. When this recognition deepens, the fear of death diminishes because the continuity of awareness becomes directly evident. Modern neuroscience supports this through studies on ego dissolution during deep meditation or psychedelic-assisted therapy. Brain imaging shows reduced activity in the default mode network, the same network linked to self-referential thought. As this network quiets, individuals report feelings of unity, timelessness, and peace, states remarkably similar to Ibn Arabi's description of expanded awareness. Mindfulness-based interventions demonstrate similar effects. By observing thoughts and emotions without identification, practitioners experience a sense of self that is fluid rather than fixed. This practice mirrors Ibn Arabi's invitation to witness the soul as an instrument of perception, not as the perceiver itself. The conscious experience of ego death prepares the individual for physical death. When psychological resistance dissolves, awareness stabilizes in presence, no longer dependent on form for its continuity. In Ibn Arabi's metaphysics, existence unfolds as an infinite cycle of manifestation and return. A process called tajalli, or divine state. Every apparent ending is a prelude to new revelation. Death allows the infinite to express itself through renewed forms. The soul does not vanish, but continues its evolution through subtler dimensions of perception. Each phase refines awareness, moving it closer to direct recognition of its source. What Ibn Arabi calls ma'rifa, or knowledge by presence. This concept aligns with natural and scientific patterns. In biology, death sustains ecosystems. The decay of one form nourishes the emergence of another. In neuroscience, neuroplasticity demonstrates that even the brain depends on the pruning of old connections for new learning to occur. Both processes reflect transformation through dissolution. The rhythm of being, therefore, depends on death as its renewing principle. To resist death, physical, psychological, or emotional, is to resist the process of evolution itself. From a deeper philosophical standpoint, death is not an event within time. It is a transition of time perception itself. Ibn Arabi distinguishes between existence, al-wujud, which is timeless, and essences, n, which appear in time. The soul mistakes its transient essence, its body and story, for its true existence. Death corrects this misperception. Modern cognitive science offers an illuminating comparison. Human consciousness organizes reality through temporal sequencing, the integration of memory and prediction into a narrative of continuity. When this sequence is interrupted, as in deep meditation or near-death states, individuals often report a timeless sense of presence. This suggests that death involves not the destruction of consciousness, but the cessation of the temporal framework through which consciousness interprets experience. It is a shift from narrative consciousness, the self situated in time, to pure awareness. Being beyond time, how can these metaphysical insights become practical tools for modern psychological growth? Ibn Arabi's ideas can be applied rationally in 4 domains. Reflective awareness of mortality can be cultivated. Practicing conscious reflection on mortality, known as memento mori, has measurable psychological benefits. Studies show that acknowledging death enhances value, alignment, empathy, and gratitude. For Ibn Arabi, this reflection is not morbid but clarifying. To remember death is to remember transformation. Emotional regulation through acceptance supports this clarity. Mindfulness and emotional labeling techniques allow individuals to confront impermanence with balance. Neuroscience confirms that such practices reduce activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and strengthen prefrontal regulation. This aligns with Ibn Arabi's description of the nafs al-mutmainah, the tranquil soul that achieves serenity through surrender to reality. Reframing identity is equally important. Self-inquiry practices, asking who am I beyond thought and body. Develop metacognitive awareness. This reduces attachment to the narrative self and parallels Ibn Arabi's idea of dying before death. The individual begins to perceive themselves as consciousness itself, rather than as its temporary contents. There are ethical implications of oneness. Recognizing the unity of being dissolves separative morality. Ethical action then arises naturally, grounded in empathy and shared essence, not in obligation or fear of punishment. Compassion becomes an expression of ontology, not emotion. Death, often seen as the collapse of existence, is for Ibn Arabi the unveiling of its true nature. His teaching bridges ancient metaphysics with modern cognitive science in three essential insights. The self is not a substance, but a process. Consciousness is not produced by matter, but expressed through it. Death is not negation, but transition, the reconfiguration of perception within an unbroken field of being. To understand death intellectually is to live more consciously. To experience symbolic death, the dissolution of egoic identity, is to awaken to the continuity of awareness that neither begins nor ends. If birth is the entrance into form, then death is the return to formless awareness. To know this is not to escape life, but to live it without fear.